Let's bring in Congressman Greg Steube from House Judiciary. Sir, your reaction, do you think Republicans will call in both John Bolton and the Bidens? Senator John Kennedy says this could then end up lasting through even May. What do you think?
Well, yeah, if they're going to call one witness, then they need to call all the witnesses that a Republican had. There's a list of them that House Republicans asked for in the House that we were denied the opportunity to hear from those witnesses. We also need, I would like to hear from Adam Schiff and what contact he had with the whistleblower before they filed the complaint. I'd like to hear from Hunter Biden. I'd like to hear from Joe Biden. These are all witnesses that Republicans have talked about hearing. So if they're going to call one witness, you are opening the door to allow all sorts of witnesses to be called by members of the Senate. And if you call one, I don't see how you could then vote against calling others if they're the witnesses that the Trump defense team wants to call.
Wow, this is going to be a battle royale then. I mean, you know, getting back to John Bolton, Democrat Adam Schiff even attacked John Bolton for not testifying in the House, saying it was because of John Bolton's book deal. But Republican Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming says there's nothing new from John Bolton's book. Your take on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, and one thing about Adam Schiff, he said that the evidence is overwhelming and compelling and incriminating. If it's so overwhelming and compelling and incriminating, then why do they need additional witnesses to come and testify about it? So that's one issue as to the witnesses at all. But again, you heard Alan Dershowitz when he gave the defense yesterday, I believe it was, that even if you took what John Bolton as being true, it's not an impeachable offense. You haven't met that constitutional burden of treason, bribery, high crimes, or misdemeanors. So I think you'll see the defense team, the Trump defense team, argue that point, even if he is brought in to testify.
You know, it looks like viewers are tuning out impeachment. Maybe 5% of total available viewers, adult viewership watched. It's down from about 80% during the Nixon-Watergate hearings, about 33% during Clinton. Does Bolton's reported accusations, change a key element of the president's defense, that the president released the aid to Ukraine without getting any investigation of the Bidens, and that the Ukrainians didn't feel there was any pressure? Does it change any of that?
I don't think it changes anything. You go back to the actual facts that we know, and the facts that we know is we have the transcript. All the American people can read for themselves. There's no quid pro quo in the transcript. There's actually no discussion about the aid at all in the transcript. So we know that for a fact, that that wasn't a basis and that wasn't what was going on. So go back to the facts. And so I think the president's in a good place here. There's certainly not 20 votes in the U.S. Senate amongst Republicans to convict him. But you're right, this may go on for weeks and weeks and weeks if they start calling multiple different witnesses.
Wow. Congressman, thanks for joining us. It's great to see you.
They'd already proven their case. But since then, House Democrats have spent 4 weeks contradicting both of those claims. They spent 4 weeks demonstrating through their actions that impeachment is actually not that urgent, and they do not actually have much confidence in their case. An arbitrary 4-week delay does not, Madam President, show urgency. And these demands for the Senate to pre-commit to reopening the House investigation do not show confidence. There's a reason why the House inquiry that led to President Nixon's resignation took 14 months of hearings in addition to the separate special prosecutor. There's a reason why the Clinton impeachment inquiry drew on years of prior investigation and mountains of testimony from firsthand fact witnesses. That's because both of those houses of representatives knew they had to prove their case before submitting it to the Senate for judgment. Both situations involved legal battles over executive privilege, extensive litigation, both times, not after a trial had been handed to the Senate, but beforehand, when the case was actually being compiled. Mountains of evidence, mountains of testimony, long legal battles over privilege. And none of this discovery took place over here in the Senate. The Constitution gives the sole power of impeachment to the House. If a House majority wants to impeach a president, the ball is in their court. But they have to do the work. They have to prove their case. Nothing in our history or our Constitution says a House majority can pass what amounts to a half-baked censure resolution and then insist that the Senate fill in the blanks. There's no constitutional exception for a House majority with a short attention span. Look, I think everyone knows this process has not been some earnest fact-finding mission with House Democrats following each thread wherever it leads. The Speaker of the House did not reluctantly decide to impeach after poring over secondhand impressions of civil servants. This was a predetermined political conclusion. Members of her conference had been publicly promising it literally for years. That's why the investigation stopped long before the House had come anywhere near proving what they allege. They pulled the plug early because the facts were never the point. They were never the point. The point was to check a political box. For goodness sake, the very morning after the House's historic vote, Speaker Pelosi literally chastised reporters for asking too many questions about impeachment. She tried to change the subject to economic policy. She said, "Any other questions? Anybody want to talk about the SALT tax? I'm not going to answer any more questions on this," referring to impeachment. Really? Really? You impeach a president of the United States, and the very next morning, there's nothing to see here? Does that sound like a Speaker of the House who really thinks the survival of the Republic is on the line? Does anyone really think that if Democrats truly believed the President of the United States was a criminal who is imperiling our country, they would have abandoned the search for evidence because they didn't want to make time for due process? That they would have pulled the plug on the investigation just because it sounded good to finish by Christmas? That they would have delayed the trial for a month while they test drove new talking points? That they would have been trying to change the subject 12 hours after the vote? Madam President, I cannot say what Democrats do and do not really believe. But they certainly do not seem to display the urgency or the seriousness you'd expect from people who actually thought they had proven the president should be removed. Last weekend, on television, the Speaker bragged that this president is impeached for life, regardless of what the Senate does. Regardless of what the Senate does. As if the ultimate verdict were sort of an afterthought. Likewise, Senate Democratic leader recently said that as long as he can try to use the trial process to hurt some Republicans' re-election chances, quote, it's a win-win. That's what this is all about. The Democratic leader just laid it right out there in case anybody had any doubt. What a revealing admission. Forget about the fate of the presidency, forget about the Constitution. As long as the process helps Democrats' political fortunes, our colleagues, Democratic colleagues, call it a win-win. Do these sound like leaders who really believe we're in a constitutional crisis? One that requires the most severe remedy in our entire system of government? Does it sound like that? Here's how deep we have come into bizarro world. The latest Democratic talking point is that if the Senate conducts a trial based on what the House itself looked at, we'll be engaged in a cover-up. Did you get that? Unless the Senate steps outside our lane and takes it upon ourselves to supplement the House case, it's a cover-up? Do they think the entire country has forgotten what they were saying just a couple of days ago? We heard over and over that the House case on its own was totally damning and convincing. That's what they were saying a few days ago. Clearly, a majority of the House felt it was sufficient to impeach. And a number of Senate Democrats were happy to prejudge the case publicly and suggest the House had proven enough for removal. But now, Madam President, all of a sudden, the story has reversed. Now we hardly know anything. Now the investigation is just beginning. Now what the House has produced is so weak that they're calling their own investigation a cover-up. Who would be the author of this cover-up? Chairman Schiff? We've arrived at a simple contradiction. Two things cannot be both true. House Democrats' case cannot simultaneously be so robust that it was enough to impeach in the first place, but also so weak that the Senate needs to go fishing. If the existing case is strong, there's no need for the judge and the jury to reopen the investigation. If the existing case is weak, House Democrats should not have impeached in the first place. I think I'm beginning to understand why the Speaker wanted to change the subject to tax policy. But unfortunately, no matter how irresponsibly this has been handled across the Capitol, impeachment is not a political game, and the United States Senate will not treat it like one. Madam President, the Senate is not in order.
Senate come to order.